He-Man travels to Earth. Chuck Norris roundhouse kicks bad guys. Join me for a conversation with author Austin Trunick.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. You know, I was going to do some kind of big intro and tell you about my RPG resources and a little bit more about today's guest, but I'm going to skip all that and jump right into the interview because this interview is awesome. Here it is. My guest today is the author of the Canon Film Guide Volume 1, as well as the recently released Volume 2, Austin Trunick. Austin, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back on, Matt.
No, absolutely. It's my pleasure. We had a great conversation in the first episode when you were on, and I will make sure I put a link to that in the show notes. So if somebody is listening to this and they missed that first discussion, you should definitely go back and check that out because I kind of ran you through haphazardly through all kinds of 80s action movies and the history of Canon films and all of that stuff, which you were graciously kind just to follow along and answer all of my questions. But we did talk about that you were a role player from back in the day and that you had a break. But now, since that last episode, you have started playing again. Why don't you fill us in on what you've been playing and what that experience is like?
Well, the biggest development as far as role playing in my life has been, but not long after we talked, my wife took me out for my birthday, and we went to one of the local role playing shops. It's a Battle Standard in Windsor, Connecticut, and they actually run a living campaign. And she talked me into joining, I think, just to give me another reason to get out of the house. So I'm not just rewatching the same 80s action movies over and over again in my basement after the kids go to bed. So it was great. That was her birthday gift to me. It was a membership there, and it's something that my experience from when I was younger, role playing was always, you get together with a few friends and it's around a kitchen table, or we'd play in one of my buddy's basements just on his floor when we were young. And I had missed that, but this is really interesting because they run this campaign. They're running games. I think it's eight people around a table max, but most nights, and they have DMs that they pay to come in, and really you can drop in and play whenever you want. And what I love about, that's an amazing thing there is just, I can fit it easily into a schedule. It's one of these things where, if I'm having a bad Wednesday, of all days, I can, put the children to bed and head over there and see what, just join in the game, which is fun. But the coolest thing about this is it's the way they run it. And I'm sure other stores all over country and groups and stuff do it the similar way, is that I love that the world that this takes place in, time moves whether you're playing it or not. It's the sort of this shared world for all of the games and everyone who's playing and all the different sessions, which is neat. So my first session, I joined in, and I got off the boat onto the continent that their game takes place in, and the city had just been under siege by dragons. So it was like walking into like the smoldering ruins of this town. And it was just so cool for my first experience joining that group to learn what happened, because some of the people I'd played with had been there during this like multi-week siege. And so it's really neat because, if I'm gone for a month, it feels like a month has passed in this place almost in real time. And it's just really, really interesting for me, for somebody who had a very, my early background in role playing was I want to say like, it looks like the Stranger Things sort of playing with my friends as a kid. This was something that it's just so well organized, and so it feels so professional. It's fun to be part of that. It's it's just really, really fun to play. And it's something that it's been great because I'm so excited to find out what's happened in this world each time that I think it's gotten me out of the house more often because I want to get back there and see what's happened.
Yeah, that's awesome. So are you playing D&D 5e?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I definitely want to follow up. You said it was a shared world, and so time passes each time that you come back in. A lot of people, a lot of dungeon masters kind of struggle with that. And I think it's understandable once you get to a certain age, right? Like you can't really, every Wednesday is going to be different for us, right? As as adults and people with families and stuff, and whatever night you're trying to to play on, and it's hard to get a consistent group. So I was just wondering, what are some of the DMs use to just make sure, what was your character doing while you had to miss like 3 weeks? What was your character doing during that time, or how did they make that time pass?
Well, there's sort of an upkeep that you have to pay. So if you're say there's a way to learn skills and languages and things like that, and you could apply your character. Say your character was doing that during these weeks, he was studying a language, but then you have to pay an upkeep. You have to have the money to have been paying your sort of cost of living.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that, your character is, I guess, just considered to be working and just doing odd jobs to pay for their rent in their room or wherever they're staying. I haven't been playing long enough to build up the sort of wealth needed to buy an apartment. That's something you can do and not have to sort of pay that upkeep or have that goal to pay your upkeep while your character's during downtime. But then again, I'm playing a monk, so it probably doesn't make much thematic sense for me to buy an apartment anyway. Even if I had that sort of gold stash. Yeah. But it's interesting because they use Discord very, very frequently as sort of to report on the going ons. So the DMs that work there, they're always on there sort of posting updates all the time. So every now and then I can just pull up my phone and pull up the Discord app and sort of see what some of the highlights and it's almost like reading the news for a fictional world, which is very fun. It's I remember logging in about a week after my first session and seeing that somebody had just got on to update that the smoke had finally cleared from the fires that were burning in the town in the city when I got there. And I was like, wow, that's actually really cool. I can really visualize this. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. I always enjoyed role playing, but this has been the most like the easiest time I've had actually investing in sort of this world beyond just it feeling like a game. It feels like a really shared experience, which is neat. It's neat. I mean, I listen to a lot of people talk about role playing games and their best sessions, and they've had that experience, which is cool. And I feel like I'm finally getting that for the first time. Nice.
No, that is really, really neat, and I'm glad that you're really into it. And it sounds awesome. The way that the DMs and that are working it and using Discord to update everybody. I guess one question I would ask is that dungeon masters usually struggle with is like, is it all taking place in one location? So your characters could be working or doing the studying, but what if the main group travels somewhere? How do you catch up? Do they let you catch up in some way?
So they actually break down on their schedule the groups into tiers.
Okay.
So the tier 1 is, I think, up to level 4. Tier 2, so on going up. So the ones I've been involved in are all still tier 1, which tend to so far have been based around the main city, gotcha. This main port city. But you can post you can read in advance sort of where each different night is sort of a different part of the world. I wish I could speak more to that, but I'm still towards the very like low level end of the involvement. But that does make me think of something else that I really like about what they do here is I have a tier 1 character that I made, and I've been trying to get into as many tier 1 sessions as I can to sort of work my way out of that tier and keep building up. But if you go on a night where they're not running a tier 1 game, they have sort of house characters. They're pre-generated characters, sort of shared ones that you can play. So if the requirement for whatever they're playing that night is suggested for level 10 or something, you can go and you can take one of these extra characters and you can play that character for the night, and you can keep a percentage of the experience to apply to one of your own characters later on. But it's just nice because if there's really not any reason that if there's a game going on that I can't join in, because I could use one of those characters that they have. So, or it even gives you the chance to play something. I've been playing a monk as my own character, but if I wanted to try something else, another class or another race, that's an easy way to just try it out and test it out. And also get to play in some of the higher levels that I might not reach. I might not be lucky enough to survive.
Sure.
See.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds awesome, and I'm glad you're getting back into the hobby. I mean, so many people nowadays obviously are into the hobby. It is, I think it's like a second golden age from the 80s, right? We're seeing it just pop up all over the place, and so I am definitely glad that you are getting to play. And it is interesting to hear you say, that it was like when you were younger, it was kind of a little haphazard, but now this is giving you a better experience. I've been there. I was the dungeon master for haphazard sessions when I was young, because I didn't know any of the rules. I'll tell you that, or I knew 3 of them, and then and the other 5 I totally just made up or whatever, and then everything else was just my whim as a 12-year-old or whatever it was.
Oh yeah, that's the difference. This is the first main campaign I've been involved in, which thankfully was DM'd by somebody who wasn't a teenager, I guess. that might speak to the quality, but these are also great DMs there, which is I'm lucky to have a resource, have a store like this that is so dedicated to getting it going. But it's been a blast. I am having a lot of fun with it. I'm glad our conversation, it did really kickstart me last time, because I know we were talking. I was like, I bought some books, and I might want to try to get some friends and DM something. And but after we spoke, I was like, I really, really want to do this now. And it led to me trying to seek out what stores were nearby, what gaming shops.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I will take a little bit of credit there then.
You should.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I mean, it's just awesome. I love the hobby so much. I want everybody to role play. So, because I think it's so awesome. So that's really great. But now, of course, you are, as we've talked about in the first episode, and then, of course, as I introduced you, you are the author of the Canon Film Guide Volume 1 and then the new Volume 2. And part of my idea here with the podcast, hopefully it comes across to listeners and guests as well, is that I like to talk about a variety of subjects so we can draw from these different subjects and learn how to be better game masters and better role players. And I think that we can, anywhere we can get little bits of story from that, we can take those things and use them in our role-playing game campaigns. And so we talked a lot about the history of Canon films in our first conversation, which was a kind of a crazy story of a lot of good movies and action movies from the 80s. And you kind of gave us a history of that, but you now have the first volume out and the second volume out of, talking about all of these these films from the 80s. Maybe if you could just, we talked about it in the first episode, but maybe just give just a really quick thumbnail. What was Cannon Films again, just to kind of reorient people just a little bit?
Sure. So yeah, Cannon Films was originally the company was founded in the 1960s, and they put out a few independent features. Their most successful one was a movie called Joe with Peter Boyle in the 60s. But most of their time was spent doing little tiny grindhouse films for drive-in audiences and buying up a lot of, I'm gonna say, Swedish. Best way to describe it is Swedish pornography, and dubbing it and subtitling and sending it into the X-rated theaters. And it was not a company that was really making big news or making a big footprint in the industry. And by the late 70s, they had been failing. Meanwhile, we have two cousins in Israel and based out of Tel Aviv, Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus, who had been making these independent films mostly in Israel, but they had done some in all different corners of the world, that low budget films, but their real talent was for selling these movies. They would take these movies that you think wouldn't have a very big audience, but they would be able to sell them to every country, to Japan, to Germany, to Italy, to Spain, everywhere but the US, really, so they could make these small films. They wanted to break into Hollywood. That was Golden Globus's dream. And their way of doing it was to buy an American company that already sort of had a distribution system and use that to sort of be their entryway into Hollywood. And when the old Canon, was failing in the late 70s, the Canon Golden Globus came in and basically bought it, buying up, using their back catalog, selling the company's back catalog, their old films, to other countries in order to pay for it. So the Canon, as far as we think about them, as far as what's covered in the book, is Canon in the 1980s and early 90s. And it was Canon when it was run by Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus. And they were really two outsiders to Hollywood, but they were salesmen. They were really talented salesmen. They could take ideas and movies, and one of their first big hits was a series of ninja films that started with Enter the Ninja. But for example, they could take that idea, they could make up a fake poster, an advertisement for Enter the Ninja, and then they would take it. They would sell the video rights. They would sell the US theatrical rights. They'd sell all the different foreign rights. They'd pre-sell it to cable back in the movie channels and HBO days. And they'd make $5 million worth of pre-sales. Then they'd go and they make the movie. They'd make Enter the Ninja for $1 million. So by the point, even before it went into production and before it came out in theaters, it had already made a significant profit. And that was their model for a long time. And this coincided with the video store boom, VHS and Beta suddenly giving an all new market, as well as cable, giving a new market to sell films in. And for the first few years in the 80s building up, Canon was a company that just produced so many films, so many low budget movies. And using that model, they were able to just keep sort of pumping them out. And they made a lot of ninja films. They struck on Charles Bronson, was in the early 1980s when Bronson was in his 60s, by making the Death Wish sequels and making a bunch of films with Charles Bronson that had that international audience and did very well for them. But then they also later on would stumble onto Chuck Norris and turn middle-aged karate instructor who had been in a few movies into a bona fide box office star. Mm-hmm. And then you also get people like Michael Dudikoff and later on Jean-Claude Van Damme and someone I know you're going to talk about, but Dolph Lundgren. They gave him his first starring role in the Masters of the Universe movie. But so Canon's really fascinating because they're a company that, especially if you grew up in the video store era, mm-hmm. in the late 80s, early 90s, you could walk in and I like to say that you couldn't spin around with your arms out in a video store, any aisle of the video store, without knocking a couple Canon VHS tapes off the shelf, because they were that prolific. I mean, when you're looking at, especially in the years covered in my second volume, they were producing very famously, their 1986 slate they had announced was going to be 60 movies, which would have put a new, if they had they hit that goal, that would have been more than one Canon movie in theaters every weekend, which is just nuts when your studios, the big studios that they're competing with, might do 5 movies in a year. So Canon was fun. And especially if you were somebody who, like me, I can speak for myself, but as a young boy, young man in a video store in the late 1980s, Canon movies were especially ones that would attract my attention, whether that was a ninja on a rooftop or a barbarian lifting a big old sword above their head. And this was stuff that spoke to me and appealed to me. So, usually if you're a fan of action movies, especially low budget action movies, you definitely know Canon. You've probably seen many of their movies without even realizing that it all came from the same company.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you're describing a lot of the same experiences that I had, that just going to video stores in the 80s, early 90s, and just grabbing up these movies and then coming home and then realizing each one starts off with the Canon film logo, right? And it was just like, oh, wow. And it even got to the point to where I was like, I want to work for Canon Films, right? Like I was like 13, 14 years old. I was like, I want to work for Canon Films. I had no idea it was going bankrupt at the time, but that's a story we talked about before. But I mean, they just put out like the coolest movies, right? Like the covers sold you on the movies. And then I think one thing though, too, that people will forget. Now I was renting a lot of especially the rated R ones, because we couldn't go to the theater and see them because I was underage. But these were in theaters, right? These were not made for straight to video. These played in theaters. Commercials for them were on TV in the afternoon, in the evening, after school and stuff. I mean, these were big weekend movies, or they seemed like they were big weekend movies anyway, even though Canon was quite a bit smaller than all the the main big studios. And like you were saying, that they were such good salesmen. Well, I just remember the marketing campaigns were just so good, and they were just like spot on. They had like, I don't know, they had like teenage boy, like the profile down exactly, right? Because like and I think one one example is the show Entertainment Tonight. The Canon Films was on that show like every night. We're talking about a movie, talking about Chuck Norris in a movie or something. And I remember Delta Force, right? Like they built up Delta Force so big, like that. I mean, I wanted to see Delta Force, like, I don't know what, right? Like it was like this anticipation thing, like crazy. And I remember like on Entertainment Tonight, they had like a huge like black tie party or whatever for the, for Delta Force. And then, of course, I had to wait like, 8 months or whatever, or a year until it came out on VHS. But I mean, as soon as it hit the shelves on VHS, like we grabbed that thing, and me and my brothers watched Delta Force. I mean, that was crazy. But I just recently went back and we rewatched Delta Force, and while some things are dated, there are some very powerful scenes in this movie that I don't think that people would be expecting from a Chuck Norris movie where he just like, single-handedly saves everybody or whatever. There were just some very powerful scenes in the hijacking of a plane, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but there were just some scenes in that movie that were just so powerful. It's just like, it's almost out of place to see, kind of toying with some big questions. That it's almost out of place to see that something like that in a movie nowadays.
Yeah. So yeah, Delta Force isn't interesting because it was a big movie for Canon.
Mm-hmm.
They had Chuck Norris, of course, had been uh, a surprise star with Missing in Action in '84. They had released that, and that movie had done far better than anybody expected. It was one of the most successful movies they had as far as profits in their entire run.
Mm-hmm.
And that was followed by Invasion USA in 1985, which opened at #1 at the box office, which was another, for Canada, a company that people love. They didn't have many #1 hits at the box office. So when they did it, they really kind of tried to see how far they could go with that. And then so the follow up to Invasion USA then was going to be the Delta Force. And the Delta Force is actually, when they were first selling it, which is interesting, it was going to be their team up of Chuck Norris and Charles Bronson, their two biggest stars.
Wow.
So the first ads that you can find out there for the Delta Force had, the two those, a picture of Chuck Norris, a picture of Charles Bronson on the other side, and the message, "You're going to need to build bigger theaters." It's fun, but the problem is they had contracts with both of those guys that required, it's the money up front, and the pre-sales weren't enough to justify paying both of them. So Chuck stayed, and Bronson was replaced with Lee Marvin. Yeah, but they assembled this movie was going to be a big deal. You could tell it was a big deal because Menachem Golan himself, the head honcho of Canon, took time away from running the company and making deals to go direct it himself. Mm-hmm. And he assembled a cast. You mentioned that there are some touching scenes. There are many Oscar winners in that cast. I think far more than any other Canon film, but also these great stars you have. Besides Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin as your two main heroes, you have George Kennedy in there, Joey Bishop, Shelley Winters, Robert Vaughn is the sort of leader. You Martin Balsam. I'm just thinking of some of the faces you see who are really well respected thespians, and then you get other people just in these smaller roles who are in great spots. You have Hannah Shagola from all the Fassbender movies. You have Steve James, who is sort of the ultimate 80s action movie sidekick. And of course, Robert Forster, if I haven't mentioned him yet, he plays the main bad guy in the movie. What's interesting about Delta Force is compared to the other Chuck Norris movies that he did with Canon, it's almost like there's definitely two sides to the film. There's everything that takes place on the airplane. For anybody who doesn't know, the story is about a airplane that gets hijacked by terrorists, and the Delta Force is sent in to save them. But a lot of the movie takes place on the plane as these people are sort of being questioned and tortured and terrorized by these terrorists led by a character played by Robert Forster. And all of that stuff was interesting because it was actually based in heavily inspired by an actual hijacking that had happened really right before the Delta Force went into production. And so certain things, one of the things is they're trying to find, the terrorists are trying to find and separate the Jewish passengers on this plane. And there's a flight attendant who helps sort of hide their passports and hide their names and not translate things correctly so that she can help these people from being hurt or unnecessarily. And that was something that was big in the news this summer before Delta Force came out. Something that was kind of touchy about the release, but was also unfortunately pretty exploitative, is there's a scene in the movie where a U.S. soldier is shot. He's killed, and that was something that had happened in this hijacking, where that was big on the news. That was an image of the news, and the Canon kind of took that almost exactly without any sort of permission or anything. And for a great movie, that's the one thing that I see that I think kind of bothers me, because I can't imagine having having a family member or somebody killed in something like that, an event like very famously on the news, and then having it be a part of a major Chuck Norris motion picture about, I think, 5 months later.
Yeah.
It's stuff. This stuff was actually happening while Cannon was in pre-production on the Delta Force, and the writer James Bruner, who had also written Missing in Action and Invasion USA for Cannon, he was there, and Menachem actually wanted to send him over to the airport, I believe it was in Kuwait, where this hijacking was still happening. They're still negotiating the hostages, so he could take notes.
Oh, wow.
And it's funny. I mean, I interviewed him for the second book, and he talks a little bit about this, but he's like, I would be the only, he's like, I'm just a, Hollywood screenwriter. What am I going to be doing over there where hostage negotiations? There's no way I'm going over there. Mm-hmm. And he's, it's a wild story, but yeah, that stuff is a combination of great actors, but also a lot of it is inspired by, ripped from the headlines while they were rewriting and changing stuff in the Delta Force script for all those airplane scenes up until they were shooting almost. But in real life, the prisoners, the hostages, were just eventually released. And for the canon version, of course, that's not nearly exciting enough. So they put Chuck Norris on a rocket launching motorcycle and sent him in there to single with a small team of these tough commandos to save the day. And you get some incredible action. The second half of the movie is just nonstop. Chuck Norris blowing people up and kicking people, and with the help of Steve James and some other great actors.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was unaware of some of that stuff. I knew there had been some high profile hijackings in the 80s, but I certainly did not know that they wanted the screenwriter to go over and take notes. I did not know that one. So, and I'm still processing that, I think.
It's a fun interview in the second book. And
yeah,
it's wild to think that, yeah.
Cause if my family's on the plane, I don't know if I want a Hollywood screenwriter over there.
Yes, and I'm sure I'd try not to ask specifically about what people were paid, but I'm sure a Canon screenwriter was not paid anywhere near enough to risk his well-being in an active hostage situation, taking notes for the movie.
Yeah, I would imagine not. But as far as Delta Force goes, what do you think it ranks against, say, Missing in Action or Invasion USA? How would you put it as a film?
I enjoy Delta Force a lot. The second half is so gonzo, over the top, like crazy action, and it's one of the biggest Canon films. I have a personal soft spot. My favorite in the sort of Chuck Norris Canon filmography is Invasion USA, because it was one that I had rented as pretty often when I was younger, and it's also one that it's got even more of the nonstop action happening. The story behind that one is kind of funny, because there's so for anybody who's not familiar with it, Invasion USA is a movie where Chuck Norris plays, just basically like he does in so many movies, like America's ultimate commando. And you have a terrorist, a vaguely Soviet terrorist played by Richard Lynch, who decides that he's going to round up basically all the bad guys from all over the world, just like a random group of, terrorists, Soviets at that point. There's people who just look like bikers. There's lots of bikers in the movie.
Yeah.
It just creates this giant army of like Legion of Doom of just like low level bad guys, loads them onto the old like boats they used to storm Normandy.
Yeah.
And unloads them onto the beach, loads them into trucks, and just ships them all over the country and just to take over the United States. And it's a crazy enough premise, but the whole idea is that like they say like the U.S. hasn't been invaded on its own. There hasn't been a war on the America's soil since that. I guess the Revolutionary War. I can't remember which one they exactly
1812,
said, but
maybe
yeah,
1812,
yeah,
something like that, yeah.
Foreign invaders, and so it's just these bad guys going around blowing things up and just doing generally bad guy stuff. And Chuck Norris, he's the one guy, he has a history. He caught the terrorist leader, Richard Lynch's character, years and years ago, and he's the one person that this ultimate like bad guy leader fears. So he's trying to take him out of the picture over and over and over again, because when the bad guy goes to sleep, when he's taking a nap during his busy and leading an invasion of the United States, you see him having nightmares about Chuck Norris like capturing him and like waking up in a sweat. He's really afraid of Chuck Norris, and so this whole
who wouldn't be?
Yeah, I don't blame him. But this movie is Chuck Norris just going around like stopping all these terrorists. But the thing that's funny about it is they hired an actress to play the sort of a news reporter. And the way the screenplay was written is she was the one who was sort of telling what was happening, like sort of filling everything out in between the action scenes where Chuck Norris shows up. And also tipping, like he would watch her reports in the story, and so he would know where the terrorists and could guess where they were going to be. And she was the one who really filled in all of the narration, sort of told the audience what was supposed to be happening and why all this makes sense. But unfortunately, they shot, and the actress was so bad that they cut most of her out. She's still in it, and she's still like in tiny parts. You see her every now and then, sort of like Chuck Norris flirts with her and saves her in something. But they cut out basically all of the narrative framing for this that's necessary for the movie. So when watching Invasion USA now, like the version that most people see is it's just scenes of bad guys doing something, and then Chuck Norris like walking out from behind a corner, or like the camera panning over to Chuck Norris, and there's no indication of why he knows where the terrorists are, what they're up to. It's just some sort of weird Chuck Norris magic where if something bad's about to happen in like he'll be in Miami in one scene, and Chuck Norris thwarts a plot there, and then something's happening in Atlanta, and a truck pulls around the corner and it's driven by Chuck Norris, and it's just like how does he know exactly where everyone's going to be? So it's a very funny, but it came out and it opened at #1 at the box office. It was a huge hit. But it's just it's a movie that's literally distilled down to just the most goofy, wild Chuck Norris action, because all the scenes without that they had to cut because the actress wasn't up to snuff. But it's Delta Force and Delta Force Invasion USA for me are both up there. Invasion USA is one that I saw more times as when I was young, so I'm gonna have a soft spot for that out of the two. If I were forced to pick.
And I have not seen Invasion USA now in a long time. I've been meaning to go back and watch it. It's just my time to watch movies is severely limited nowadays with 4 small children and things like that. But and I would love to watch it again, because I did, like I said, I did rewatch Delta Force and Delta Force 2 and some of the other movies. But Invasion USA, well, first off, Richard Lynch is awesome, and he shows up in Star Trek: The Next Generation. For any fans out there, he shows up in some other movies. He's usually an evil guy, and because I think he was in a number. He's like always an evil guy in TV shows and stuff like this, and he has the look. He has the look for it, right? He has the kind of sneering look for it, and but I always remember the one thing about it. Well, like that again, Invasion USA was just another example of how they built their marketing into like a fever pitch. Like we had to see Invasion USA, right? And so like I just remember my older cousins being able to go to the theater and seeing it and telling us about it, and then we were able to rent it later on. But the one thing with Richard Lynch, of course, is the how Chuck Norris finally kills him at the end, which like lives in my, my, I don't know how old I would have been. I would have been like 12 or 13 or something, probably 12 when I saw it. And it was just like burned into my mind because there is no normal death if you invade the USA, right? There is
no. You need to make sure that you use the maximum overkill you can. Yeah. And so, Chuck Norris, dual wielding Uzis through most of the whole thing. And then the rocket launchers, look for the rocket launchers. That's what I'll say to the audience if they haven't seen it. But the classic rocket launcher I smile thinking about it because there's so many very prominent rocket launcher attacks in canon movies. That was one of their favorite go-to special effects.
I think, obviously it's because it's just like way over the top, right? It's huge. It explodes. You get all this visual stuff. Somebody shooting a rocket launcher is it's a powerful image, right? On screen. And so, absolutely.
And Invasion USA is a movie that I will also say they really got so much bang for their buck. So much production value you see on screen. Just talking about the rocket launchers, they went and scouted the locations before they had like locked in all the shooting. So the writer was able to actually, once they knew the location, write it into the film. But there's this Richard Lynch being a typical Richard Lynch character. There's a scene you can see. It's very within probably the first half hour of the movie. But Richard Lynch rolls into this little cul-de-sac town where there's people out decorating Christmas trees, singing Christmas carols, putting up their lights and everything. It's just this idyllic American like suburban scene. And Richard Lynch just passed me the rocket launcher, and he just goes and he blows up this entire town. And it's horrifying to see it on screen because it looks like a super expensive movie. And you think of how expensive that would be to do something like that. But Canon, they shot around most of the movie in Florida and Georgia. They found a small area, a small little development that was semi-new houses, but was being demolished to expand the Atlanta airport. So they went in and they said, hey, you're going to tear all these houses down anyway. Do you mind if we blow them up first? So those are these are real homes that people were living in, up till a month or two beforehand. They actually blow up a small, now abandoned suburb, but it's something like you can't, that's incredible production value. If you can only afford explosives, it's ideal to find houses that you're just allowed to blow up with them.
No, absolutely.
There's a scene in that film too that takes place in a shopping mall, and it's a very big shootout, but it was a section of a shopping mall that was in the greater Atlanta region, but they were actually gutting it after the movie, that section, to rebuild and basically make a bigger, nicer. So they got permission to, run a pickup truck through the doors and have explosions go off. And
Yeah, and those sequences are something else, right? Like I have vivid memories of those because it looks so real, because it was in a real location. And you would think, a movie would have to build something like that or something, or it would look, something about the look would be off, because you would have to build something like that and spend $1 million or something. But they had the real thing, so the look is perfect. It looks exactly like, like you said, a little suburban neighborhood and a mall, because that's what it was. And they definitely added a ton of value there. I love the way you said Chuck Norris magic, because of course not only is that cool, but I can't get out of my mind. I think it was a 90s movie. I think it's called Forest Warrior, where he transforms. He actually transforms into animals. Chuck Norris actually transforms into animals. That one's a little crazy, but if nobody's seen that one, he turns into a bear, I think, and a wolf or something.
That's the movie with the very famous GIF GIF file where he stops the chainsaw with his bare hand.
Yes.
Yeah. The guy's trying to cut down a tree.
Yeah. Yeah. He's just holding it with his hand.
Oh, and that's got some magnificent. He's got like the long hair in that one.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like dressed in buckskin and stuff. Yeah.
That's probably the last really like fun Chuck Norris movie, because he kind of, it was just Walker and then sort of just cameos in movies after that.
Yeah, in the Expendables and stuff, he just shows up for a moment or something. But I think we can give him a little allowance that he's not as young as he used to be, I think. And it happens to everybody.
He wasn't young in the exactly. When he was making the Cannon movies in the 80s. I think he was in his early 40s when he signed his contract with them. And I mean, that's
I think
that's just to be able to I don't know if any point in my life I could be doing any of the stunts that he was doing in those films.
No, absolutely.
Maybe when I was in the best shape of my life at 20.
Yeah. No, I agree. I could not roundhouse kick somebody like that at 46, let alone at or whatever he was doing, let alone at 40, at 20, let alone 46, like he was doing. Yeah. So no, absolutely. Well, I'm taking up all the time. We're talking about these awesome movies. I wanted to definitely talk about Masters of the Universe, because this is another one of those movies that just ramped up the marketing so much. I think it came out in 87, and just watching, just after school, the commercials were just Masters of the Universe, Masters of the Universe, #1 movie, Masters of the Universe, with a girl saying I love Star Wars, and this felt like Star Wars, and all of this stuff. And they just built it up. And of course it was PG, I think. And so I was able to see it in the theater, and I was so excited, because just, in the span of, my childhood, right? Just a couple, it was only a few years before, we were watching the cartoon and stuff. And then now, we're like 13, the cartoon had gone by the wayside, but, now here's this movie. And so I was like, I've got to see it in the theater. And I drugged my buddy along with me, and he was all embarrassed that he's like, what if somebody from school sees me? And I was like, but then they'd be at the same movie, man. And we went and saw Masters of the Universe, and it was crazy. And, they just built it up so much. And, I mean, I enjoyed it, and I still like it. I watched it a few years ago again. The Honest trailer for it, if anybody watches the Honest trailers, is hilarious, by the way, but most of those are. But why don't you tell us a little about the Masters of the Universe movies? Because I think it played into the downfall of canon as well, didn't it?
It did. Both canon and the Masters of the Universe toy, really as a franchise, it kind of it came towards it was not beneficial to either of them, really. But so it was a movie. It was being produced originally outside of canon. There was a producer, Ed Pressman, who was actually, his father was the guy who founded Pressman Toys, but Ed Pressman had also worked on Conan and Conan the Barbarian and all these different very successful independent guy. He would take these projects, sort of package them, and then take them to studios. And so he had been working with Mattel to basically make a live action Master Universe movie. And this was getting to be towards I think they could see the popularity of the cartoon and the toy line just sort of had crested and was beginning to fall. Mm-hmm. And their hope was that a live action movie would be the thing that could really save this giant cash cow that that Mattel had. Yeah. And there were all sorts of companies that were bidding for it, and this was a time when, I mean, right now we're on the day we're talking, just like a yesterday or the day before, we got all these images that were all over Twitter and websites for the Barbie movie. Like nowadays you can make any cartoon or video game into a movie, but in the 1980s this was still a pretty radical idea, and studios weren't really behind it. And they ended up, Canon offered to make it, and it was, Mattel chose to work with Canon. And unfortunately I don't think they could have known at that time that, because of how quickly Canon fell apart, but that Canon would not have really the sort of resources and money that would require to make a movie of what they, big sci-fi movie, when they were actually shooting it. But when it came to Canon, it had already had the director, it had already had a screenplay. Dolph Lundgren was already attached to it, so Canon looked at it as a package and probably thought, oh, this is fantastic, this is great. And Canon, I know that at the time they really sort of wanted to have a hit with kids, kind of their own, like a Star Wars, or yeah. They really wanted something like that in their pocket. But yeah, Master Universe, unfortunately, by the time Canon actually got to shooting it, it was already a movie that was really needed all the budget. It was already, the budget they had given it was already probably too small for what the script required, but they were doing their best to get all the production value they could out of that. But that summer, that summer and fall when it was shooting, Canon was actually in pretty dire financial straits. They had a lot of loans called in. They were under investigation by the SEC for kind of fudging their numbers and for how much they spent and how much things earned, and their stocks had crashed. Their stocks had gone from like something like $52 to $2 or something over the course of just like 2 months. It was bad. So they needed suddenly to pay off loans and things with money that they just did not have. So there was a group of Canon movies that were shooting at the time, and one of them was Masters of the Universe. Another one is the Charles Bronson movie Assassination, where Canon was basically like, okay, you have to stop at this time, at this day, like finish everything you can, because we're literally pulling the plug. We can't give you any more money. We don't have it. And there had been several times where checks didn't show up to the Masters Universe sets, and the director had to talk the cast and crew and hey, like, we're going to send the producer over to Canon. Like, you're already here for the day. If you just work for the day and just trust me, like, they'll come back with your checks. And there were times when Mattel had to write checks to cover just paying the crew because Canon did not have the money. But one of the funny things about Master Universe is the very last thing they were shooting was the kind of the epic battle between Skeletor and He-Man that would finish the film. But that was on the last day. That was their last day of shooting that they had. And they shot basically up to the point where, Skeletor's staff and He-Man's sword collide, and the plug got pulled. People left. The director was able to talk one of the cameramen, somebody there with basically a color wheel to operate like one light and a color wheel. And Dolph Lundgren, Frank Langella, and Anthony DeLongis, who did all the sword training and the sword choreography. He played Blade in the movie and also doubled for Skeletor in some of the sword fights because he was training Dolph. And they had just a few hours to basically, you see that when you see the battle in the movie, their swords collide and it's like the lights go out.
Yeah.
You suddenly at this super like well-lit throne room, it goes to like, it looks like a dark music video where they're just fighting in the dark. And that's because he knew that if he didn't get that footage with this like tiny crew that was willing just to like stay over and work, for nothing, that Cannon wanted to end the movie with just their swords meeting, and then it would be the end. There was no battle. that was Cannon's solution for like just not having not being able to finish the movie, is that it would just end, and that maybe they would get a sequel out of it because people would want to see like what happens now that we've been waiting for He-Man and Skeletor to fight. Like maybe we'll start the second movie with the battle. And it would have been the most unsatisfying possible ending I can imagine. But he was able to get enough footage with that color wheel that he was actually able to get Cannon to pony up a little bit more money for one more day of shooting, to shoot some more dialogue and some more scenes of sort of Skeletor getting knocked off this pedestal or a platform into the pit of lava or whatever it is. But he actually did that by he got Cannon to agree to pay for half of it if the director paid for the other half of that day of shooting himself.
Wow.
They're like, if you want these scenes so bad, if you need them so bad for the movie to make sense, you pay for them. It was basically that sort of thing. Gosh. So it's that's what Master Universe is. It's a fun movie. I could see where, at least I remember my experience. I didn't see it in theaters, but it was one of these ones because it was PG. I could see it as a kid, and I was being familiar with He-Man. I was excited to rent it as soon as we saw it on the shelf. Yeah. But I remember looking at it and thinking, like, where's Battle Cat? Where's Orko? What is these aren't the characters I know, but those characters would have been so expensive to produce. Those are way out of Cannon's budget that they were just written out. And if they invented new characters for the movie and the movie was a hit, those were new toys they could sell. Yeah. But they had the problems with the budget and not having enough money. But by the time the movie came out, the cartoon was off the air. And the action figures, I think they only did one more like small line of them after the movie came out. Like the action figure line was basically dead. The He-Man like craze was over because all of us who had been young at the He-Man age when the cartoon was on were probably, like you said, like at the age where we're a little too embarrassed to go see the He-Man movie.
Yeah. Except I wasn't. I was. I didn't realize. I didn't realize I was so uncool.
I mean, the movie that's in there, the effects are fun. You have some great actors. There's no human being like alive or dead to have ever been on the planet that is more like visually appropriate to play He-Man than Dolph in 1987.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was he fit it perfectly, I think. It is. I don't know. It was. I think. Well, they did one of the things right, of course, to keep the budget low. Right, is you have your heroes from another planet come to Earth, right? Right. So, that'll keep your budget low because you don't need costumes. You can buy costumes at Goodwill or whatever. And, and you don't have to have new cars all the time, to show anything is in the future or whatever, but, it was, it is interesting though, when you take a look at some of the people who worked on the film, I mean, some of the cast obviously have gone on to huge things. I'm forgetting his name. The one police detective, of course, was the standard in the 80s. Yeah, Tolkien. Yes. Who he was in Back to the Future, and he was kind of the standard mean guy in the 80s, and a whole bunch of people gone on. Yeah.
I mean, Frank Langella is so good as Skeletor. They knowing what little they had to work with. I think the director and screenwriter were very smart about where they did spend the money that they had. Like you said, they set it on Earth, and they knew that they could either spend money making a bunch of kind of okay sets, or they could spend their entire budget for building sets to build one really awesome Castle Grayskull set. And they've just built the throne room. They blew all that budget there, but the movie opens there, the movie ends there. So that's something that, yes, everything in the middle takes place on Earth, but everybody remember this awesome looking throne room full of these big statues and all sorts of effects. You had Billy Barty, who had been, making movies since the 1930s as Gwildor, everybody's favorite new character.
Yes.
And you had Meg Foster as Evil Lynn, John Cypher. You mentioned Robert Duncan McNeil, who went on to a very big Star Trek.
Absolutely.
And obviously Courtney Cox. Chelsea Field too. Wow, I didn't think of that.
Chelsea Field. She was in Delta Force too, wasn't she?
She was in Commando.
Right?
Yeah, she was the "Don't bother my friend, he's dead tired," and she was the stewardess.
Oh, that's right. I was thinking she was a stewardess. Yep, that's Commando. Yep. Oh, right.
Yeah.
She was in something I just watched fairly recently.
She is on one of the the big, I think I want to say Dick Wolf or like CBS, NCIS.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just saw her in a movie though. I haven't got to watch many movies recently. So what did I see her in? It was an older movie. I can't remember.
Like Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man. She's in Last Boy Scout. She got a part in the Last Boy Scout with
Harley Davidson. Marlboro Man is an awesome movie. Oh my gosh, that's an awesome movie. I haven't seen that one in a while. I think I got it on DVD. That was awesome. Oh, I can't remember, but Commando. She was the stewardess. Dead tired or whatever. Yeah. The cast is fantastic in the Master of the Universe, but also I think. One thing that was really brought out to me, and I think, like I said, I mentioned it before, the parody of the Honest Trailer, and then I looked it up after I watched the Honest Trailer. Some of the technical crew are some of the best people. Were some of the best people in the business, right? It was edited by. Didn't he edit Lawrence of Arabia?
Oh yeah, she. Gosh, pardon me. I'm blanking. Her name is escaping me at the moment. Ann Coates.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I confused.
It's good to. Yeah, she did The Elephant Man. She edited Lawrence of Arabia. It was the music by Bill Conti. Who did some great stuff. The screenwriter was David Odell, who worked a lot with Jim Henson, but had written The Dark Crystal right before this.
Yes.
So it was kind of.
And I think the cinematographer is famous as well.
Yeah. Hananya Bear did a lot of Canon movies. He did Break In and Break In 2 and Ninja 3.
Yeah. And it's just kind of amazing. Just the number of people. I know one of the big knocks on the film is that it deals a lot with Courtney Cox's character's dead parents, right? And kind of the drama with her dead parents, where you want to see He-Man more, right? You want to see, you want to see He-Man. But I mean, I think it's just, I think something like that is just hearkening back to a day when movies had a lot more story in them back in the day. And I think people forget that we're kind of in an era where you don't really develop the characters too much. You just kind of move on from, you give them a little development, whereas back in the day, and also I'm sure it helped the runtime, but you got a lot of depth into characters. If you think of even like the Karate Kid or whatever, we get a lot of Daniel's like home life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or one of the most, I think, examples about there. Well, two examples, like the first Mad Max movie, like we get a glimpse inside of his marriage for a long time before he goes mad. And and then Rocky, right? I mean, nothing even, we just learn about Rocky's life for the first like 45 minutes of the movie. And and I think that was kind of something that happened back then a little bit more than we're a little used to now. We tend to, say like Rey and the new Star Wars movie, we just cut really quickly. We show her life for, 3 minutes and that's pushing it. Right. And we kind of move on. Yeah. But I don't know. It's such a, in so many ways, it's such a strange movie, right? It's just, it's definitely 80s. And, but like I said, I still, the last time I watched it a number of years ago, I still thought it was very enjoyable. The sad thing that you did mention is, their swords click together. There's a big flash, and then they're running through a dark room with like muslin, like hanging, and you're like, oh, so that would have been fun to see that. But I am running you over on time, so I apologize about that.
Oh, no worries.
Okay. But we'll wrap up here soon. But I did want to mention there was, I know from canon then there was some rumblings of a sequel, because I forced my friend to stay to the end of the credits, and we watched Skeletor pop up out of the I don't know what it is, the acid pool or whatever. That was like one of the first like end credit scenes that I think I ever remember seeing,
and it was the first to tease a sequel, which is very interesting, because I mean, you had it in Ferris Bueller, and the Muppet movies had the sort of little jokes after the credits, but this is the first one to actually, which now, that's the with the Marvel movies, that's the, expected in all of our tentpole films. Back then, that was a pretty revolutionary idea. But so the sequel is interesting because they did announce it, which is, I mean, this was already when people were, even just the press, you can see sort of responding to Cannon's announcements like, yeah, right. Nobody believed him anymore because everybody knew that they were just doing, whatever they, selling the furniture in their offices just to like keep the lights on for another day. Yeah. But but at that point, Dolph, who was becoming a bigger and bigger star, did not want to have anything to do with it. So he was being replaced by Laird Hamilton, the surfer. And it's interesting. Yeah. If you have time, the Masters of the Universe sequel ended up becoming Cyborg. If you want to, much about, or want to hear a little about that.
Yeah. We can a little bit.
Okay. Sure. I'll try to do the quick Cliff Notes version here, but yes, they planned Masters of the Universe 2. It was going to be, not really connected to the first one. It was going to star Laird Hamilton, and he was a high school quarterback that I'm not sure if he was He-Man living on Earth in disguise, and they were planning to shoot at Dino De Laurentiis' studios out in the Carolinas. And Canon was also, they had the option on Spider-Man at the time. They had got that for next to nothing from Marvel, Spider-Man and Captain America. And they were trying to make both these movies. And unfortunately, the plan was Albert Pyun at the time, who was directing it, who directed Cyborg. He directed a lot of really fun action B movies, The Sword and the Sorcerer, and he was set to direct both of these films at the same place. And the plan was to shoot the first part of Spider-Man, where Peter Parker is, a high school geek with, and then until he gets bit by the radioactive spider. After they shot those scenes, they were going to send all the Spider-Man actors away. The other Spider-Man, the guy playing Peter Parker, was going to work out and then just get ripped in sort of this power training over the next like 8 weeks while they were shooting Masters of the Universe 2. And then come back and shoot his scenes after they shot Masters of the Universe, when he was like suddenly newly muscular after just hardcore 8 weeks of training.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they were going to portray the transformation from Peter Parker and the Spider-Man, the bite. Anyways, the checks to Mattel and Marvel were bouncing, and they just didn't have the money. So the rights got pulled. Mm-hmm. And they had already built some of the sets for like the Daily Bugle and different things out in North Carolina. And they'd already shipped all the costumes from Masters Universe out there. So they said to Albert Pyun, can you make something else? We have Jean-Claude Van Damme on a contract. Bloodsport's been a big hit for us. Can you put him in something real quick? And so Albert Pyun went home and banged out a script for what became Cyborg, the Van Damme movie from '89. Yeah. And he had this, if the movie is kind of crazy, it is because he banged it out to use the costumes and the sets that he already had in hand. And he had to shoot it basically in the time that he had scheduled to shoot these other 2 movies. So it's actually, when you watch it, there's the main villain in Cyborg. He wears the same costume that the Blade, one of the villains in Master Universe, wears. It's the exact same chainmail armor, just being recycled from He-Man. There's scenes where they're kind of the famous, like one of the more famous battles where it's Jean-Claude Van Damme fighting in like this heavy rain and kicking mud around. Yeah. And you see the sort of like, it looks kind of like a New York, like a very stereotypical, like New York, almost like Sesame Street style set in the background. But that was the Daily Bugle building, like the facade that they had built for Spider-Man that's taking place in front of. And the bad guy, Vincent Klin, who really didn't do a ton of movies, but he was just another surfer. He was a surfer buddy of the guy who was supposed to play He-Man. So a lot of the actors that you see in Cyborg were like the guys who were just like supposed to play the like Skeletors, like minions and stuff in He-Man too, that they just sort of stuck around when the production went from being Masters 2 to something else entirely, to an unrelated Jean-Claude Van Damme movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't heard about that until I guess it was a few years ago when I started hearing about some of that, and just remembering back in the day when Marvel really struggled to get their movies off the ground, and which seems like a parallel universe compared to today, since that's about all the movies are is Marvel movies, I think. Mm-hmm. And it is it's just interesting to hear, because I think sometimes I studied filmmaking when I was in college and I think sometimes we get this idea of movies being made for, we get the idea of, okay, we're going to make a Masters of the Universe movie because there's a popular toy line, you have an audience, blah, 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 and how movies get made. But I think, when you're talking about canon, sometimes it's just like, well, movies get made because we have costumes and we have a few people on contract and we had studio space rented. Make a movie, right? Mm-hmm. Or when I interviewed Sam Freeberg and just asking, and it's just like, well, the one movie did well, so come up with a sequel in 2 weeks. Enter the Dragon did really well, so get a sequel in 2 weeks. And I don't think or Enter the Ninja, I should say, did really well. Get a sequel in 2 weeks. And you're just like with Sam Furstenberg. I'm sorry, I've said his name wrong. I'm getting confused, but it's just when you think of the process, I think sometimes is more thought out than that. But Canon just was kind of running things loose, I guess.
Canon, I mean, two of the most important things were, if you could turn out a movie fast and under budget, that's those were two of the chief qualities of the people they wanted to work with, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we said, they've made some awesome movies, and definitely some that are incredibly noteworthy. Well, I've kept you way longer than I should. Why don't Austin, why don't you tell us where we can find the books and the new book, and where people can learn more about you?
Sure. Well, the books are available through my publisher's website, Bear Manor Media, as well as, of course, your local independent bookstores, your Barnes and Nobles, and your Amazon.com. It's really anywhere you can find books. The second volume, is just now brand new on shelves and virtual shelves. As far as myself, I am on Twitter and Facebook at Canon Film Guide, just all one word on both platforms. And those are the places where I just like to share my things that I continue to find out and learn about Canon, or things that I can't fit into the books. The second volume is over 1,000 pages, and I still could only put in maybe like not even half the stuff I wish I could.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm thankful for social media to be able to keep sharing that stuff. I still describe that as the bonus features for the book, like the DVD extra materials.
Nice.
Out there. So yeah, follow me on other sites if low budget 80s filmmaking interests you at all, because I I like to share all the goofy and weird stuff that I find in the course of my research.
All right. Well, I will be sure to put links to your books and to your social media in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who's listening right now can head over there and check those out. Well, Austin, this was a great conversation as always. Thank you just so much for coming back onto the show again.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. And thank you for giving me a reason to get more serious about getting back into my role playing, because that's been a very fun part of my life for the last about 5 or 6 months since I've really been at it.
All right. Well, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Austin. It was a pleasure to have him back on the show. As you may know by now, I love movies, and it was just so cool just to be able to talk to him about Canon films, about He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and about some of the Chuck Norris movies. I love trivia. I love film history. I hope you guys do as well. But as always, I think we can take ideas and situations from movies and use them in our games to help us be better game masters, help us be better storytellers if we are writers, all of it. And so that is why I love diving into some of these movies and talking about this stuff. And I hope you understand what I'm trying to do here, that we can learn so much about running tabletop role-playing games from movies, from books, from other stories, that it is well worth our time to talk about filmmaking and what happens in some of these movies. All of that said, you should check out the show notes for this episode, because in those show notes, you will find links to Austin's books. He is the author of the Canon Film Guide, Volumes 1 and 2, which was just recently released. So please head over there, check those out, and if you want to learn more about Canon films, these are the books you need to pick up. Okay, now if you want something for free, head over to dicegeeks.com. You just type that into Google, dicegeeks.com, put a slash, type the word free, just FREE. You will get some free stuff. I know, that's why I named it free. That's why I named the webpage free, okay? Head over there. You'll get 20 free dungeon maps. You will also get some other cool little tidbits that will help you run better games. Also, you will never miss an episode of this show, and each and every Friday, you will get an email update from me letting you know what is going on here in the wild laboratory known as Dice Geeks. All right, guys, I thank you so much for listening. If you would like to support the show in some way, you can just like it, rate it, review it, subscribe it. Those things are so important, guys. So important for all of the algorithms and our AI overlords, just to let people know that the show is liked and appreciated by fans. So please, if you could do one of those things or more of them, that would be awesome. Also, if you want to help me out by supporting the show financially, you can do so at patreon.com/dicegeeks. All right, guys, until next week, make sure you are playing some tabletop role-playing games and keep gaming!